Coming up, but the characters are intriguing, and you can't turn away from watching their existence in this modern equivalent of a Norman Rockwell painting, if Norman Rockwell was a recovering meth addict. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? I've spoken before about how we seem to have abandoned the political process that every child in America was taught about, or should have been taught about, if not in school, then in that ever-present Saturday morning television instructional of my youth, Constitution Rock. In between episodes of Popeye the Sailor Man, Johnny Quest, and Bullwinkle, kids were taught about the legislative process in that classic episode, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. These days, it would seem more accurate to draft the episode as I'm just an executive bureaucrat pressuring companies and individual citizens because we know we could never get a bill passed. It could be a bit more pithy, but it's accurate. What's the latest example of an administration proving it's comprised of people who either never watched Constitution Rock as children or who never learned anything from it? It's the Biden administration through special presidential climate envoy John Kerry pressuring banks not to do business with coal companies. Incidentally, a State Department spokesman has disputed that Kerry applied such pressure. Instead, he said the companies have reached out to him to discuss financial risk and opportunities connected with climate change. I'm not buying it. I think the administration is pressuring banks, as is being reported, to drop coal business, just as the Obama administration applied pressure to banks to get them to drop banking for the firearm business. Those efforts of the Obama administration infuriated me, just as these efforts of the Biden administration do as well. The bottom line is that just as the firearms business was legal, the coal mining business is legal also. And no administration should have the power to effectively shut down or prohibit growth of a legal industry by pressuring banks not to serve it. The administration could never push legislation through both houses of Congress to ban banking for coal companies. Allowing it to do so through executive pressure on banks makes a mockery of the powers purportedly held by the legislature in our three-branch system. So what can be done about it? Well, as has increasingly proven to be the case during the first 6 months of the god-awful Biden administration, the pushback has come from red states, 15 of them to be exact. Those states have said that they intend to use their financial leverage to push back on any banks which respond to the pressure from the Biden administration by trying to pull out of lending to or otherwise being financially involved with coal, oil, and natural gas companies. The states intend to stop using any banks, including for state retirement funds, if those banks respond to the administration pressure by refusing to do business with fossil fuel entities. The treasurers of those 15 states have jointly signed a letter to John Kerry, putting him on notice of what they intend to do. The second paragraph is so spot on that it bears recitation. Quote, as a collective, we strongly oppose command and control economic policies that attempt to bend the free market to the political will of government officials. It is simply antithetical to our nation's position as a democracy and a capitalist economy for the executive branch to bully corporations into curtailing legal activities. The Biden administration's top-down tactics of picking economic winners and losers deprives the real determinant group in our society, the people, of essential choice and agency. We refuse to allow the federal government to pick our critical industries as losers, based purely on President Biden's own radical political preferences and ideologies. At the outset of his administration, President Biden promised to be a president for all Americans. The pressure his administration is imposing on American financial institutions runs directly counter to that promise, as it will certainly harm the most economically depressed areas in our states and the most vulnerable of our people." Close quote. As the Biden administration moves in an ever more extreme direction at the behest of the demanding left-wing base of the Democrat Party, it will increasingly be the states that present the pushback. I suppose in that respect there's a silver lining to the far leftism coming from this administration. It's forcing the states to recognize their power. While we're left with a Republican Party in Congress that's effectively limited to saying no to preventing passage of legislation but unable to pass anything of its own, the states may be our only hope. On a positive note, they seem to be rising to the occasion. For other examples, look to Governor DeSantis in Florida holding the line on prohibiting vaccine passports. Numerous states' attorneys general suing over the administration's refusal to enforce immigration laws and pausing deportations. 12 states suing over its halting of oil and gas leases on federal lands. And 21 states suing to overturn Biden's decision to stop the Keystone Pipeline. These suits, this pushback is rapidly becoming not just something that's absolutely necessary, but also something that's expected by the constituents in red states. The voters in those states expect to see the Republicans they elected fight back. Increasingly, it's going to become a litmus test. If you can't demonstrate that you've fought hard, that you've tried everything legally available to stop the left-wing extremism coming from Washington, D.C., your chances for re-election or ascendance to a higher position as a Republican will be nil. In that respect, the lunacy coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue could actually end up doing the Republican Party a favor. It could finally force Republican officials to fight back. Next topic. Will the Biden administration make steaks extremely rare? I've warned in the past about the goals of the far left when it comes to consumption of meats. I go all the way back to episode 22, Cortez, Crenshaw, and cow farts, on that issue. I've said before that I fear a day when the leftist loons get control of farm policy and I'm forced to gnaw on some sort of vegan version of Soylent Green instead of my beloved bacon cheeseburger topped with the ever-present onion ring. If you doubt that the Biden administration will at least try to coerce Americans into eating some sort of meat substitute from the kitchens of Union Carbide rather than a ribeye or burger from the Great Plains or Midwest, just think about Joe Biden's promise to be the first nation to reach net zero agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. If he really meant that, and remember the environmental left is not going to let up the pressure on him to prove that he really meant that, how could he possibly do it without dramatically reducing American production of beef? Given the extent to which the Biden administration is kowtowed to the left, just look to the language, to the proposals of the left-wing activists on these issues for some idea of where there's a good chance the Biden admin is heading. Politico recently opined on May 23 in an article by Ryan McCrimmon that Biden isn't going to try to seriously restrict meat production. In fact, the title of the article is "The Red Meat Issue Biden Won't Touch." And that same article includes a quote from an environmental activist that tells us the pressure Biden is being hit with. And given his recent history of caving to pressure from the left, I don't think carnivores like me can rest easy. From Stephanie Feldstein, Population Sustainability Director at the Center for Biological Diversity, we get this push, which might eventually find favor in a Biden presidency. Quote, "There's simply too much meat and dairy being produced right now for any of those small tweaks to get the emissions reductions we need." Close quote. And she goes on, quote, "There are so many policies from dietary guidelines to what school meals are reimbursed to agricultural loans and government purchases that are currently promoting overproduction of meat, and all of that needs to change." Close quote. So the push includes making it harder to get an agricultural loan if you're producing beef. Think about the subject I talked about earlier where the administration is allegedly pressuring banks not to lend to coal companies. Do you really think it's a stretch to believe they might take the same approach with cattle farming? I don't. And it's all the more reason to elect as many Republicans as conceivably possible in 2022 and then put a Republican back in the White House in 2024. In the interim, if he does go down the destructive route that I fear he may with regard to cattle production, count on the red state governors to go straight to court, just as they have regarding so many of the administration's other left-wing administrative overreaches. Let's hope they can limit the damage this presidency can do to our agriculture before we have a chance to turn it around at the ballot box. Next topic. Mare of Easttown. I'm going to close with a brief segment that isn't really political. I've occasionally provide film reviews or television miniseries reviews, but usually with a political twist. Either a political commentary on the content of the shows themselves or a political analysis of why the critics or the award shows like or don't like the movies or television series. This time, I just want to provide a brief recommendation of a miniseries, one season, 7 episodes, just in case you haven't heard of it and already formed your own opinion. On a recommendation from a friend, I recently watched the HBO miniseries Mare of Easttown. Now, the Mare in that title is not spelled M-A-Y-O-R. Instead, it's the first name of the protagonist, spelled M-A-R-E, portrayed by Kate Winslet in one of the best performances of her career. She plays a police detective in a rural Pennsylvania town where it seems like virtually every resident is at least one of her cousins. I certainly wouldn't say the town is quaint. Instead, it's representative of what has happened in so many small towns in the heartland of America. Drug abuse and alcoholism are rampant, and the storyline is filled with disheartening turns. But the characters are intriguing, and you can't turn away from watching their existence in this modern equivalent of a Norman Rockwell painting if Norman Rockwell was a recovering meth addict. But what pulls it all together is a mystery, a murder mystery, and like any good murder mystery, interesting characters, many of them with the potential to be the guilty party, keep you coming back episode after episode. I highly recommend Mare of Easttown. If you haven't seen it already, what are you waiting for? Frankly, it's the best drama I've seen on television in quite a while. Hopefully, Political Spirits is the best podcast you've heard in quite a while. And you won't have to wait long to hear it again. I'll be back next week with another episode of Political Spirits. Be sure to listen and tell your friends to do so as well. And like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. And select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.